Hey guys, what's up? I'm starting a new, admittedly short series today that I'm gonna call Glossary videos, where I just run through a bunch of linguistics terms, define them, and maybe say something else interesting about them or help y'all figure out what they mean more easily. But don't worry, I'll do it logically by starting broad and going more specific in each category. It's not just gonna be linguistic term salad. This first video is going to be all about nouns and pronouns, since the same kinds of things largely apply to both of them. Given their role, I'll be putting the glossary videos in my playlist titled Reference Videos, which I'm largely designing for people just getting into linguistics, but you can totally stay if you're a longtime viewer of mine because I will get into some rarer features. The only video that predates this one in the playlist is the IPA video, which you could say is a bit like a glossary video for sounds itself, since so many of those terms were defined there. With that out of the way, let's go! So first off, to start with the obvious, what exactly is a noun? You've probably heard that it's a person, place, or thing, but along with ignoring abstract concepts, which are also nouns, linguists sometimes think this definition doesn't go far enough. A definition I heard at one point in college was that a noun is basically any word that can take the syntactic place of a noun. If that sounds circular, that's because it is, but this basically implies that a noun can be a subject or an object, two words we'll get onto later. Within nouns though, there are also proper nouns, which is basically just names of specific people or places, and depending on where you grew up, your teachers may have taught you proper nouns as what you need to capitalize. But unfortunately, that's a bit inconsistent across languages. Any noun that's not proper is called a common noun, and finally, of course, a pronoun is a normally short word that can take the place of an already established noun. People don't agree on whether nouns are a subclass of nouns or their own thing, but either way, this video can be used for both of them. Next up, we'll talk about grammatical number. This is basically when how many of something there is encoded in the word. You've definitely heard of two of these terms, singular and plural. This is a very common distinction where singular refers to one thing and plural refers to two or more things, like I just did there with thing and things. But also, I kinda just lied about the definition of plural. It's a relative term. That's because some languages also have grammatical indication for specific numbers other than one, and when that happens, the term plural means larger than that number. The main one is the dual, which is used when there's exactly two of something. Arabic has it, for example, on the word for line. Singular, one line is asad. Dual, two lions is asadain, and plural, lions is usud, in this case specifically indicating that there are three or more lions. There can also be more numbers like trial, quadral, and quintal, but those are extremely rare. But other than plural, a few languages also have specific grammatical forms for a greater plural, which is a different plural form that emphasizes how many of something there are. And if you have a greater plural, you may also have a greatest plural, which is even more extreme. There's also a pockal number describing a few. However, basing your grammatical number system around singular and plural isn't always done. The reverse, where the plural is the default, is also possible, although it's normally not a system used in a whole language, just a few relevant words, often things that come in groups. In this case, the number indicating a group is called collective, and if you have one of that thing, it's called singulative. This is how the Russian word for great behaves, with vinograd for the collective and vinogradina for the singulative. There's also another system where the default, called the general number, actually indicates no number in particular, but if you do want to indicate a number, it's called either singulative or plurative. And to end this section, we gotta talk about whether certain nouns even allow pluralization in the first place. There are three types of nouns for this. First, nouns that can get pluralized are called count nouns, like cat. Contrast this with nouns that can't get pluralized, like milk. These are called mass nouns as they're seen as a mass of themselves. They're also sometimes called uncountable nouns. Languages often treat nouns differently depending on which category they fall into, like how someone could have too many cats but too much milk, if either of those limits even exists. That being said, the line between count and mass nouns can be a bit fuzzy. For example, meat is primarily a mass noun, but if you're describing different types of meat, you may collectively call them meats. And finally, the third type of noun is a plurale tantum, one that's always plural and has no singular form, like scissors. But be aware that a word could be a plurale tantum in your target language, even if it isn't one in your native language. For example, the Hebrew words maim and shamaim mean water and sky respectively, and they're both plurale tantums despite their English translations not being such. So now that we've got number out of the way, I'll explain some things that are pronoun specific. If you're looking at a verb conjugation chart with pronouns, for example, the columns will likely represent number, while the rows will represent grammatical person. Person refers to the noun being replaced by that pronoun, but specifically from the perspective of the speaker. And here's a bonus term. Anything in linguistics that changes depending on the perspective of the speaker is called deictic, the noun form being deixis. Back to person, if the speaker is talking about themselves, that's first person. If the speaker is talking about the listener, that's second person. And if the speaker isn't talking about themselves or the listener, that's third person. There aren't really any people higher than third unless you're working with a particularly overzealous linguist. But what if the pronoun is plural and both the speaker and the listener are being talked about? Now we get to talk about clusivity distinctions, which are just that. On first person plural pronouns, that's we and us, some languages differentiate whether the listener is also included among we. If the listener is included, that's inclusive, but if the listener is not included, that's exclusive. For example, in Telugu, inclusive we is manam, while exclusive we is memu. And the last thing to talk about for pronouns is honorifics. These are alternative pronouns used to show more respect, typically either to elders or people you don't know. You could have a simple two-way system between informal and formal, like Spanish with tú and usted. Interestingly, a lot of languages from Europe have this one system where they use the second person plural pronoun as the singular formal pronoun, commonly referred to as TV distinction, named after the most common first letters of the singular pronoun, which is tu in French and ty in Russian, and the plural pronoun, which is vous in French and vi in Russian. Also, be aware that formal pronouns, if they come from another pronoun like this, may be treated as a different person or number than they represent when verbs are conjugated for them. There can also be more levels of formality, like Telugu's four-tier system. Also, I don't speak Japanese, but I understand that language is infamous for its formality system. So now it's time for noun classes. These are basically categories that nouns are divided into in a language, and which category a noun is in affects how other words or affixes get inflected when they modify that noun. You can basically see modify as meaning it's near that noun, for lack of a better term. Anyway, some languages, like English and Hungarian, don't have noun classes. In languages that do, some of them have what's called natural systems, so their noun classes are based on what the noun literally is. The best known of these is animate versus inanimate, where animate refers to people and animals, and inanimate refers to, well, inanimate objects. There could be other variations though, like human versus non-human. By the way, about the human category, some people prefer using the term rational for it, since the human category normally ends up including gods as well, but personally I'm not too much of a stickler about that. Oh yeah, and personal is another name you may hear for the human category. But when languages actually do make a grammatical distinction between humans and gods, the god one is called divine, and when non-human animals have their own class, it's called zoic, like zoology. Now, some of y'all may be wondering why I haven't brought up the term grammatical gender yet. This is because that's a much narrower term these days. The word gender, linguistic or otherwise, in fact actually used to just mean category before it started to specifically refer to the categories of humans. It's a doublet with genre. However, gender is something else that nouns can be sorted into. Sometimes it's still a natural system, like the system on Telugu singular nouns virile versus non-virile. Virile means specifically male humans, while non-virile is anything that's not a male human. I haven't heard of a female equivalent for this. When I googled this question, Merriam-Webster gave me muliebrity, but this word has no apparent linguistic use, and I can't figure out how I'd make it an adjective like virile. Muliebritis, maybe? I'd say we could call it feminine, but that term's already taken by an arbitrary gender, so let's move on to those. Yeah, as opposed to natural gender, there's also arbitrary gender, which is a system where nouns are assigned to a noun class, but it's arbitrary, not based on anything that applies to the literal noun. One system you may have heard of, used in languages like Spanish and Hebrew, is masculine versus feminine. Of course, masculine describes male humans and feminine describes female humans, but all other nouns in those languages, including inanimate objects, are also either masculine or feminine. And since it's arbitrary, you can't expect it to be the same in every language. This is where you famously get like French learners, for example, complaining about needing to remember that the bread's a guy but the apple's a girl or stuff like that. But in addition to those two, some languages, like all Slavic languages, have a three-gender system of masculine, feminine, and neuter, which is basically just a third gender that rarely has humans in it. And also in a few languages, the masculine and feminine have now merged into each other, forming a new gender, the common gender. This is found in Swedish, Danish, and Dutch, and remember, it's different from an animate-inanimate system because common neuter systems have nouns assigned arbitrarily, just like the three-gender system they come from. Finally, for the noun classes, there's the Bantu languages, which have so many noun classes that they're numbered. So if you know the numbers 1 through 22, you're good on those terms. But yeah, as a general rule of thumb, you should probably be worried if you see numbers larger than 3 in linguistics. Alright, so now for the final subject of the nouns, we get to talk about one of the most interesting things in them. Cases. A grammatical case is basically a change made to a noun based on its role in the sentence. If the term role isn't clear enough in this context, just keep watching, it'll become clear in a minute. But basically, if you only speak English or something like that, think about the difference between I and me. English has cases for most of the pronouns, but many other languages also put cases on their nouns. The first type of case is what's known as morphosyntactic alignment cases, and I'll start on those by just explaining that dichotomy we just saw with I versus me. I is the nominative case, which is the subject of the sentence, while me is the oblique case, which is basically everything except the subject, more concisely called the object. As for those two terms, the subject is the noun whose action is described by the verb, while the object has the verb done to it or something along those lines. You may have seen the subject described as the doer of the verb in the past, but this isn't necessarily always true. That's a different dichotomy in which the agent does the action and the patient is affected by the action. These words normally correspond to subject and object, but not always, as agent and patient are semantic terms, so they deal with meaning rather than grammar. The rest of the semantic terms dealing with nouns' roles are rather easy to understand, and they line up with the cases pretty consistently. And this is also different from topic and focus, two more semantic terms. The topic is, well, the topic, and the focus is the new information presented in the sentence. But some languages mark them like cases, so be aware of that. Now back to the morphosyntactic alignment cases, the object can get split up even further. This is typically into the accusative case and the dative case. The accusative is for the direct object, while the dative is for the indirect object. To differentiate those terms, we have the sentence, tell me a story. In this situation, the story is the direct object because it's getting told, while me is the indirect object because while the verb isn't being done to me, I am affected by the action. Now back to this whole nominative accusative thing, it may interest you to know that not all languages line up their cases like this, and for this, I need to introduce two verb terms. A transitive verb is one that can take a direct object, like see, and an intransitive verb cannot, like sleep. So anyway, in the languages that have so-called nominative accusative alignment, which is most languages, the subject of an intransitive verb is in the nominative case, just like the subject of a transitive verb. But in some other languages, the subject of an intransitive verb will instead share its case marking with the direct object of a transitive verb, and this is called the absolutive case. The subject of a transitive verb, on the other hand, will have the ergative case. Therefore, these languages, like Basque and Georgian, are said to have ergative-absolutive alignment, but also be aware that the term absolutive case may be used in other contexts to describe any case that's not explicitly marked. There's also the much rarer class of tripartite languages, in which the subjects of both transitive and intransitive verbs and the object of a transitive verb all have their own cases, and for those, the case that an intransitive verb's noun is in is simply called the intransitive case. So now onto the other cases, I'll just quickly say that when a language has a case for addressing people or things directly, it's called the vocative case. And now we get to talk about possession, which is when something belongs to or is otherwise attributed to something else. The main case you'll hear about for this is the genitive case. However, be aware that in some languages that use a genitive case, especially in Europe, that case may have more functions than just possession. Also, some languages may distinguish possession based on alienability, that being whether or not you could hypothetically lose possession of the thing. Think my pencil versus my hand. The pencil would be alienable possession, while the hand would be inalienable possession. Telugu differentiates it, but not on possessive pronouns, and Icelandic has a different possession system specifically for body parts. In Icelandic, my milk is mjölkin mín, while my foot is fóturinn á mér, literally the foot on me. However, the possession isn't always indicated on the possessor. In at least Hebrew and Arabic, they have the construct case, which is when the main noun gets inflected while the possessor stays unchanged. For example, the Hebrew and Arabic words for station are respectively tachana and mahatta, while train station is respectively tachanat rakevet and mahattat al-itar. The word for station got inflected, whereas in languages with the genitive, the word for train would have been inflected instead. And now finally we get to the debated type of case, as though the construct case isn't already debated. I've discussed those things in a video before, I'll leave a timed link in the description to that part, but basically, the rest of these cases often have one specific meaning, making them line up better with adpositions. Adpositions, which are typically called prepositions when they go before the noun, and postpositions when they go after, are words such as in, on, next to, over, under, etc. Calling them cases is often a bit overkill. There are some of these cases which probably do count as cases, especially the locative, which is used in, for example, most Slavic languages when certain prepositions are before the noun, although it's called the prepositional case in Russian for some reason. But then there are the other cases, like the instrumental, which generally means with, but it's completely legit in the Slavic languages because there it has several different jobs. In other languages it literally just means with, but I should mention here that instrumental specifically refers to with as in using a tool for something. To talk about accompaniment, that's the commutative case, and oftentimes the term instrumental commutative is used to combine them. Thankfully though, there's a system to the rest of these cases. Most of their names involve a root of either essive or lative with some sort of prefix. Therefore, all you really need to know is that essive refers to being and lative refers to movement, and then you need to know what the prefixes mean, but you'll probably be familiar with most of them from other Latin-based words. The essive case itself means as, but also at least in Hungarian, the only language I've studied to this point that uses wild terms like this, it's split into the essive formal case, which is just as, and the essive modal case, which I've only ever seen used for a language someone speaks. And then there's all the prefixes like inessive in, superessive on, subessive under, adessive at, apodessive next to, antessive before, possessive behind or after, abessive without, and others that you could invent just by using that formula. Meanwhile, the lative case itself technically means to, but it's often instead named with a prefix as the allative case, also meaning to. And for the other prefixes, there's illative into, translative becoming, delative off of, ablative away from, perlative through, elative out of, inellative from inside, postellative from behind, and don't even get me started on the sublative. As for the rest of these cases, their names are just kinda obvious. For some of them, we have terminative until, benefactive for, causal final for but in different sense, aversive to avoid, intrative among, equative like, and that's about all I feel like saying. So that's it, that was a bunch of noun terms explained. Sorry to end on the cases so now everyone's head is fried, but it seemed logical, and if you're starting out with this whole languages thing, I hope the video was useful. Thanks for watching, I'll see y'all next time.